Welcome to Craft Community, the local Irish beer podcast brought to you by the Independent Craft Brewers of Ireland and Board Bia. I'm Susan Boyle, your host, international beer judge and award-winning beer writer. And today I'm joined by Joe Donnelly from Rascals, Peter Mosely from the Porterhouse and Vivienne Lucey from Lineman. And we're going to be discussing the importance of branding to craft brewing. So Vivienne, I'm looking across at this gorgeous selection of beautiful looking handsome cans with these lovely designs, and I know that there's an awful lot of work that goes into getting something looking this way, and I'm hoping that maybe you'll be able to talk through some of that process for our listeners.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the compliment. When Mark and I started up the brewery, actually, I would say I was earmarked to do the design before I even knew that he was going to do a brewery or open a brewery. And it came with, he had a whole lot of stuff on his side, and then I was handed this job of branding. And the first main task that happened was come up with a name, which was actually incredibly hard because we had all these cool names, but they were already taken somewhere in the world, and we wanted to be original. So the name was the first part, and then it was the logo, and then the overall look and feel of the cans. So
and tell us a little bit about the name then too. So after going through a process of having your heart set on loads of things that someone else had trademarked already, it's a bit annoying when you go through the trademark register.
It happens a lot with the beers too. The name itself came, Mark came up with the name, and it was a tribute to my late dad and his early career as a lineman in the ESB and P&T in the 40s and 50s. So I was really touched by that. And
amazing. I also love the idea of illumination and light and shining something new in the Irish craft beer world as well.
Yes, electrifying stuff.
Woohoo! Loads of different meanings. It's great.
Yeah. And it's also about progress and it's... I thought the name was good and was touching for me, I said. So when it came to doing the logo, was the next thing on the agenda, doing the logo, and because the type of beer that Mark brewed, it was really balanced and clean. I wanted to go for a really balanced and clean logo, and I chose colours black and white because colour it conveys an emotion, and white is cleanliness and goodness, and black is elegance and sophistication. So I thought those two things working together, and then I have quite a long linear typography on the cans, kind of very abstractly representing telegraph poles.
Lovely.
There you go.
Lovely.
That's my thought process. It probably doesn't come to anybody else, but sure,
I think it does, because there may be a lot of thought that goes behind it, but what you end up is a really striking and beautifully readable and very identifiable logo and naming as well, and also using the black and white palette gives you loads of potential to play with colour then as a contrast, or then also to highlight the black and white and go through with them.
Keep the logo simple, and then the cans can go wild. That was the kind of the plan.
Oh, I love it. It's so exciting.
Yeah. So when I started out then as well, part of my research was to go into, let's say, Stephen Street News, where they have 3 walls of beer fridges from floor to ceiling, and it's all cans and they're all stacked on top of each other. And it was a great place to go and see what was happening in the scene at the time. And I could see all these different designs playing out against each other. And because of that, I saw a lot of really vibrant stuff and really kind of, a lot of cartoon and nearly a lot of illustration. So because of that, I decided the brand was going to be a little bit more muted, maybe stick to block colours and then take it from there.
Very good. I think this is always the thing. How do you make your beers stand out? So when you have a beer that has a legacy and an understanding within the community, such as Porterhouse do, and I noticed, Peter, there's been such a move in relation to switches and changes in branding and what Porterhouse is doing as well, to kind of communicate that we have this kind of heritage and background, but also we can do the fun, funky, modern stuff too. How do you manage that?
I'm glad I don't really know, to be honest with you. I think the sort of newer styles of beers that we're producing, they tend to be more, how would you say, the style of beer is very much on the label and part of the name that we have. So there's a distinction between our older, more traditional beer styles, which have, the names that necessarily don't really refer to anything in terms of, say, Temple Brow or Chiller or Plain Porter, which obviously, Plain Porter obviously has a more historical context. So we have a distinction, and they're very different appearances on the packaging, on the badge, the pamphlet, the more contemporary. But it is a bit of a difficult balancing act to manage all those different beer styles.
What I've always loved about Porterhouse beers is that when you look for them, you can find out the style very quickly.
Yeah.
And I think and obviously with the name Porterhouse, you're setting yourself up as being the heart maybe of some of the styles, and then it's the family of beers that come out of that.
Well, when we first started, it was. Stout was the dominant. Obviously, it's still a big, significant part of the market in Ireland, but it was the dominant beer style that people were drinking, and it's the one that we're always judged against. That was 25 odd years ago. So it's very different now. But that playing on the name Porter is then, I suppose, sets the tone really for us ever since then.
How do you kind of, I suppose, deal with having that kind of legacy brand almost at this stage within the Irish craft beer scene, and then also bringing in new drinkers who aren't ancient like me and were drinking your beer 25 years ago?
Yeah, it's a challenge. We've got, we're in some ways I think it probably works against us a little bit because we've been on the high street so long that we're part and parcel of what people see and expect in part of the drinks industry. And when we first started, it was 96, so it was 20-something years ago. Since in that intervening period, people have been born, reached drinking age, and now are drinking, and so they've seen us as part of this, and we're very much seen as part of the establishment, which does kind of work against us, I think, in certain scenarios. And there is a risk that we could be seen as old men in the industry, which a number of us are actually, quite old men now. But we have a younger team in the management of the branding, the marketing, that area, and they're working, with respectfully towards, with the old beers styles that we have, but also at the same time trying to make sure the new ones that are coming through are more contemporary and they're matching what people's expectations are. Because the beer styles have changed tremendously.
Absolutely.
In that
Every time I go
years.
beer judging, there's like a whole new section in the beer judging handbook of things that just didn't exist.
That's right, yeah. And I think
which is exciting.
It is. Well, sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. There's so much going on. And sometimes it's difficult to keep up with it. And I think, we've established I'm one of the older people in the industry. And for me, so we have a younger set of guys working on those sort of styles of beer, tend to have, because they have more understanding of what's expected.
But I kind of think it's like, when you go to a bad wedding, and we have Joe here who has spent his time
I'm a wedding
playing
DJ.
wedding
It is
DJs.
true. Yes,
now,
it is true.
when you go to one of those weddings and people go, oh, well, should we just have to play the music the old people like? Well, old people like good music. I don't see what the problem is.
Yeah.
Older people love great beer and have great taste. I am an absolute fan of sherry, and I think everyone's granny who used to drink it were women of exceptional taste. So this is a really interesting thing where we are in an industry where there's a lot of movement, but when you are someone who has a history and a legacy within it, to being able to be proud of that is really cool.
Well, can I make a point on that? I mean,
Yeah,
you've touched on something, Peter, that I think is as important as branding, and that's relevancy. And you don't have to be a long-established player in the Irish craft beer scene to need to care about relevancy. So at Rascals, we would care about being relevant just as much as you might, Peter, or your colleagues in your marketing departments and so on. You mentioned about weddings, like people in their 70s, when they were younger, they wore flares and they danced to ABBA, and Boney M. So we forget sometimes that people always want to have a good time, try something new, or have an adventurous side. And just because you're a little bit older doesn't mean you don't have an adventurous side.
Yeah, or have something that you just know is consistent and is good as well. So there's those two combinations of having something that can relevancy is such an important thing that can be relevant to the consumers in the market as well.
Yeah, and you have to be careful as well. You know, it's a tricky one nowadays. I didn't want to say nowadays.
Oh,
but there,
Joe.
I've said it like 6 minutes into the podcast, and I've said nowadays. But you know, you have to read the room, so to speak, of consumer sentiment. You have to read the room in the name you come up with, in your design. And that's about reception and perception. So people perceive, if you do something that's maybe too risque or can be perceived wrong or incorrectly or not, you know, how you intended it, whether it's a designer name, then you might be in a spot of bother, you know.
I think that's interesting about like just testing the temperature of things and knowing what's happening, I suppose, outside the brewery, and understanding, I suppose, also what we're looking at in relation to this podcast is giving people an insight into all these thought processes that are happening before anything even gets on a shelf, before anything gets brewed, and understanding that how we can increase the audience for craft beers as well. And that's where I think marketing and relevance is really important, to make it more inclusive.
It's important with branding that you have to kind of transition across loads of different demographics, especially in Ireland, because the percentage of craft beer drinkers is so small.
It's so small.
So
Less than
small.
4%.
So you're trying to get people from the age of 20 up to 50, 60 plus, I'd say. I don't know, I don't want to tread on any toes, but like...
You looked at Peter when you
I
said
know,
that.
because he said
You
he's
didn't
the
look at
oldest
me.
one in brewing in
Thank God.
all of Ireland.
I'm not quite
I don't
that
think
old,
so. I don't think so, though.
But
Well-
also the idea of like being ageist or putting ages on it is a little prescriptive as well.
Yeah,
you know, I think
exactly.
you know, keeping it.
I
open.
think it depends on your brand identity as well. So Rascals, you know, our brand identity and the tone we use publicly and online and so on, and in our marketing is a little bit edgy and a bit cheeky and a bit irreverent, and you know, there's a sense of humour there. So that I don't think that necessarily applies to a very set or defined age demographic.
No.
It can be anyone who wants it, but that does inform the naming and the design. You know,
Because
so
it needs to feel cohesive.
yeah, you couldn't. We couldn't bring out like your designs. Lineman are quite elegant and striking, and the way you've described it earlier, Vivienne, is perfect. I get it, and I wish I could say the same about ours. Now, having said that, Trina is our designer.
Yes,
She's
and she's
absolutely
amazing.
brilliant. She is absolutely brilliant. So I'm not misrepresenting her in any way. But we couldn't, Rascals, it would be wrong if we did something like that. It wouldn't really work at a jar with our other designs if we did something like Lineman.
But you wouldn't want to either, because
No, of course not.
you want to be recognisable at some extent too. And I suppose when things have, I suppose depending on where your beers are being sold and who's putting them into the hands of the consumers, that's really important too, because there's different functions that a label or a design needs to do, or a brand identity needs to do, depending on where that transaction is happening, like who's doing the handing over of the beers. You know, is it on trade? Is it off trade? Is it within the Irish market? Is it export led? Whatever, you know.
I think you mentioned it, Peter, that like the style, I would feel as a consumer, and I always put on my consumer hat, I want to know what the style is without standing there staring at a can and turning it around in my hand for 10 minutes and go, what is this? I don't know what this is.
Yeah.
That's a big one,
That's
especially for
certainly
distributors as well. Yeah, they want to be able to just pick it off the shelf and people.
It's an IPA.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
But it's increasingly challenging sometimes. You have to look quite hard
I agree.
to
Oh, yeah.
determine what it is.
And even when you do look hard, it's not what it is. Like it's like not everything can be an IPA, you know. And, you know,
Is that a bad thing, though? I mean,
A lot of people think they are.
a lot of people do.
We try to stop
But
that.
there are some people who think that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it seems to me that the four of us here agreed that it is a bad thing, that if you can't see the style straight away, you might get frustrated as a consumer. But I remember having a discussion about this, or there was some online conference, and it was all about branding and what the customer sees with their eyes when they come in, and the shelves, and the really heavy dark branding. They called it murdered out, which was like a lot of dark and red typography, and then really bright pastels and all this kind of clashing and contrasting colours. But there was a feeling that it's not such a bad thing if they do stand and look and absorb all your branding. But I don't know, maybe I'm just impatient when I'm in the off license.
Yeah.
Sounds like a designer who was leading that
Yes,
conversation.
maybe that's it. You see.
Stop and look at my work. But when it comes to cracking open a can and pouring it in, I think there is an issue if what's on the label doesn't match the expectations of what's in your glass. It could be a fabulous beer, but if people don't know how to find that again, particularly when so many beer styles are growing so exponentially that there's so many new ones, that if people aren't thinking about producing beers that at least signpost that a little bit, I think it's hard for the consumer.
Yeah, but a lot of these beer styles are fairly transient, aren't they? Beer styles come and go nowadays.
Of course they do.
Which I think probably...
It's like, what's cool at the moment?
Yeah, well, I have no idea. But I think that may be indicative of that, a very simple IPA, I wouldn't say very, very simple IPA, but a traditional IPA or a modern traditional IPA, because it's obviously there's a
West Coast,
distinction.
East Coast.
Yeah.
No, you use,
I know,
we've illustrated your point, exactly.
And, your stouts and lagers, they're still a substantial part of the business, and then they go to beers where you have all these very transient beer styles that appear one day and they're gone the next. I think we've all seen those come and go. So it is a bit of a difficult thing to keep those beers in the mind of the customer, because they're it's, after a week or two they're gone and it's now onto something else.
Well, I think that's the nature of it. I mean, you need to keep your core beers in the mind of the customer.
Have a bit of novelty.
That, like, throwing your hat in the ring for faddish beer styles, for me is great. It's exciting. It's interesting. We'll do whatever the market says, because we bring back a couple of beers each year, and we bring them back because they're phenomenally successful and they sell out, and they are faddish and like a milkshake IPA or whatever, or something hazy, but people want them. And when you look at the research and you read through various reports and so on, it's still there. You'd be surprised. Like, you're going, is New England's are still popular? We're still all drinking New England's. Okay, well then, and some breweries almost specialise in chewy, high ABV, cloudy IPAs. And so, for me, I suppose what I'm saying is you have to keep your core beers in mind, keep them pushed out, try and get people excited about a lager, which is hard to do in the craft sector.
In the craft sector,
and then also bring out your new faddish, trendy beers every now and again, and see, does it work for you as a brewery?
Yeah, and those faddish beers sometimes then emerge to become your
staples.
Really delicious.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The new core beers.
Yeah. Well, the Rock Shandy Pale Ale has become almost a core beer for us, and I mean, I think that's extremely faddish and novelty, but we're extremely proud of it, and it's worked really, really well for us, and it's been a massive help to the company in a very difficult time. So that's stayed all year. I mean, that'll be gone to the end of the year, whereas once it was just out for a few weeks.
I think that was wonderful, though. It's a stroke of genius. You take something such a recognisable
iconic.
Irish brand, Club Orange, man. You can't beat it.
So great,
especially after the hangover. So.
But yeah, that has worked. Thank goodness. I mean, I certainly didn't. I'd be lying if I said it met my expectations. It exceeded all our expectations.
Amazing. It's great, though. It opens up a craft beer to a wider audience.
It does. Like my niece, I take all my TikTok tutorials from my nieces and my two sons, and my niece. The other day I was like, oh, this Rock Shandy Pale Ale, what's the story with that? I was like, how did you find out about that? And she said, well, that you put up that TikTok, and I was like, oh, right. And she said, and so one of my friends said it to me, and these are all 21-year-olds, 22-year-olds. So it is great to get them interested, of course, for the sector, not least,
And even for like kind of speciality beers as well, and kind of playing with that notion. Within Porterhouse, the beers that you have aged in whiskey barrels have been phenomenally successful.
Yeah, we've been doing that for quite a while now, on and off. But it seems to become more of a staple in the last, 3 or 4 years. We do this around the clock, which is this extended boiling process, which is something I saw something similar in the States a few years ago, and I thought that looked like a bit of fun. So we just tried it once we had a bit of a quiet day, so we thought we'd have a go at this, and it's been a lot more successful than we really anticipated.
It sells out all the time, and my sister's off license. She just can't keep it on the shelves whenever she's lucky enough to get it.
we've and as it's gone on, it's the first time you do it, you realise there's technical issues that need to be looked at, and then because you're only doing it once a year, it's a bit of a challenge to fix them all at once. But then now we're aging in maple syrup casks. We've got some coming out shortly that's been in smoked hickory bourbon casks. Not that it's intensely smoked or anything, it's just there in the background. But there's lots, it's when the Porterhouse started, the idea was to demonstrate that there's more than that. Stout is an umbrella term in reality, and there's lots of different
So
stouts.
I remember your oyster stout. That was one of my first introductions.
Love the
That
oyster
and
stout.
Brain Blasted. Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
The Rascals for us, Rascals all the way.
Yeah,
Loved
Rascals,
it.
yeah. But they have their moments, some for one period, one beer becomes a lot more interesting or popular,
one point that I would make on that, and I was a lone voice in Rascals, and I don't know even if I should say this publicly, but I was like a little bit cautious about going again on Rock Shandy Pale Ale and going really big on it, because in the back of my mind I'm going, are people going to go, oh, this thing again? Oh, I'm bored with that now. I want something else. Oh, you're still selling that. This is all stupid paranoia, I'm sure, from a marketing point of view. But I would hate for someone to. It's like the way people grew tired of The Simpsons. It ran its course. I wouldn't want the brewery to be viewed in that way. We should always be viewed as being a bit innovative, not even necessarily in production, but something that in a beer that you release that it's a bit different.
It's good. That's why you have seasonals too.
Yeah.
People expect the same thing, same time every year. That's something to look forward to. And that becomes a hype thing in its own right. It's like, oh, it's that season again.
Yeah, the hype thing.
Time to bring it out. So,
if you take something away, you're right. I think that's a good point, Vivienne.
Yeah, like we all look forward to strawberries in the summertime.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't we look forward to seasonal beers? And in other parts of the world, we're much more used to that idea of having certain beers that are only enjoyed at certain times of the year within season.
That's right.
And there is obviously a switch towards kind of a switch towards darker and more malty beers in the wintertime, things with maybe a little heavier in ABV, and then moving to lighter things during the summer. So we do that, so why not capitalise on it and make it really fun? What I'm loving about this flow of conversation is when there's those sparks of just having the crack with it. Like, trying this thing, Peter, that you saw somewhere else and went, I wonder what would happen if we did this extended boil, and we saw the results of it. And likewise with the surprise success of the Rock Shandy Pale Ale, and then how it also then got this cult following that followed it through for when it was released again.
Crashed the website, which was very annoying, to be honest with you, but not a bad complaint. But now we need to talk about puns. We are going to talk about puns and
go
names
on.
at some point, right? We have to.
Well, you're Rascals is kind of the king of king and queen.
I wasn't fishing. I wasn't fishing for you to say that at all. I think it's now I can't deal with the pressure for puns, and I want to move away from puns. Before I was working with Rascals as a craft beer fan, I enjoyed the puns. They're widespread in everywhere you see, and it's almost a competition, and it was good crack. And then I began working in it and coming up with puns, and then it became the stress of trying to come up with something. And they'll go,
punny.
Joel, what have you got? Joel look after that. Joel get the names, and I'm like, I'll be furnishing them with 10 names now. Hey, here's why. No, I don't like any of them. Can you come? Surely you can go. Oh, and it was just so. Yeah, I think I'm wondering, what do the panel feel about the. Should puns be done away with? Because I feel now I like one name, one word names like Jailbreak or Lager. I love that name. Something that's kind of Battle Axe is a beer we have. I really like. It's a Kvik pale ale, so there's a Viking thing. But that's what I'm kind of moving towards. But I don't know what you think about puns.
They should be used limited.
Okay, right, okay.
Seasoning.
Yes.
Right. I think I'd be inclined to agree with
Would
that.
you? Okay.
Well, the thing is that they're
Judiciously used.
They're just discriminatory as well, because it's like who's in the club who gets it, and particularly on our island, we've a specific turn of phrase, and things that may be punny here are not necessarily. It literally doesn't translate. So I am one of those people who's a bit of a fan of
You
a
like
pun.
them.
I like them. I'm the weird one, but I can absolutely step beyond my own likes and realise that actually it maybe doesn't serve the sector as well as it should.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of wondering, and then you have to come up with something. And if someone,
the pressure might be off you then, Joe. If everyone else here,
I'd be delighted.
It's so hard to name beers.
You're like, I'm literally. Do you find yourself typing words that rhyme with? Right, and
I do. Cinnamons. I don't think I can say that word.
Yeah. No, the name. And then I stopped looking online to see does it exist elsewhere, because two reasons. One, the likelihood of a court case is extremely slim, and two, you've already thought of it yourself. Yeah. So in fairness, you're not cheating. You've thought of it, and then you're going to see, does it exist? So it's not like you've stolen it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and usually it's just by some random really small American
in
brewery.
Canada or America,
so it's like, go for it.
Yeah.
It was.
But we did call something and it was from a large brewery, and then they didn't.
Oh, really?
They didn't like you. Did they write a letter?
They did, yeah.
What was it?
But then,
you have to tell us.
No, I can't tell you more than that.
Now.
Sorry, you're not going to be taken to court for saying the name of a beer.
But we, of course, had this as big issue right at the beginning. We had, when we launched the beers, it was Chiller, was Wiser Buddy, and our Temple Brow was probably the best beer in the world. And
Why not?
that
Why
got,
wouldn't it be?
but it got tremendous publicity at the
I mean,
beginning.
it's only probably.
Yeah, probably, yes. But it was, the font was very
Oh, the font as well. Now you're
word mark.
thick, close. But back in those early days, it was a great opportunity to, when nobody was familiar with the idea of a craft brewery, we were mentioned on the Wall Street Journal as this.
Amazing.
Really?
Being taken
That's
to court.
incredible.
Yeah. And then coming back to the pun one. So because like you say, in an Irish context, some of them work and some of them don't. So the Brain Blaster, which we have, which is supposed to be a loose play on Brain Blaster, is it? My Irish is not as good as it possibly could be. But in the US, it's considered to be encouraging alcohol consumption or excessive alcohol consumption, so we can't call it that over there.
Really?
So I suppose that was now my brain is just going into all kinds. You see, we said we weren't going to talk about puns, and then my brain just took us detour all into the pun.
Maybe I'm sorry
world.
if I disrupted your flow and your schedule, but
Back to branding.
I had to get the temperature on puns, just because that'll inform the rest of my week at work.
So I suppose looking at kind of the role of branding, or the role of how a beer company positions itself and attracts new people to the market. What do you think might be on the horizon for those kind of things? A little bit of, who knows? We're in such uncertain times. Like,
no idea. Everyone's scared at the moment, because of prices just going sky high. So I really don't know where everything is going to go.
Do you think there's an aspect of sustainability that comes into play with it as well, in relation to the choices around what a beer is packaged in, how it looks, if it's in bottle, is it in can? I know there's been such a really interesting move in relation to the acceptance in the consumer market for cans.
Well, cans are great. You can recycle a can in 8 weeks from old can to new can. So aluminium is really friendly, I would have thought, in terms of sustainability.
Lighter for shipping as well.
Yeah.
So I guess people, like, there's a lot of people living in apartments, they don't particularly want to have a stack of bottles that they have to bring to the recycling centre, whereas they can just take the aluminium can and put it in their bin. That works.
Because but it's also the perception of canned beer, isn't it?
Yes.
Because I would have always thought historically that the only thing that should be in a can is baked beans, and beer wouldn't be one of them. And it's the way that people have accepted the idea that you can have beer in cans and it's still being something that's a quality product.
So I think this is a remarkable shift that's happened over the last 2 and a bit years, and I really do think that the shipping aspect of it and people being able to get beers in cans more readily throughout the pandemic has been really interesting in relation to this, because prior to that I'd have lots of conversations around how customers just won't accept it in a can. Exactly, they think it should be for baked beans or it should be for more generic beers, and what I love about cans is really practically there's a bigger canvas for a brewery to express themselves on, but also the practicalities of it keeps the beer better. Once the can is well sealed and well produced, you've got something that's light proof, so you don't have issues with that, and it's just lighter. It's just.
I would challenge some of that.
Okay,
but that's from the.
Tell me more.
Well, I just think that the quality issue of cans, the filling issue that a lot of people face, that we all face with these cans, is that they're susceptible to oxygen pickup.
Yeah,
and the can, in many filling process, is something that invariably will pick up something. And I think that a lot of people, those faults are so endemic in the beer styles that we're drinking, that now they're just accepted as being part of the flavour.
True. It's a fair point.
Yeah.
I grudgingly I agree with you, Peter.
But as I'm a sort of
No,
traditionalist.
You're absolutely right, and you've touched on something that I think is actually an issue, and it's whether it's yeast contamination or anything like that, or oxidization, and I'm sure
or just things re-fermenting in the cans and the tops blown off them.
Re-fermentation, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've had that, and it's a nuisance, and you hate to get that message on Facebook or whatever it is, a picture of a can or an oxidized beer, and immediately, obviously, replace it straight away. But then you chat to the guys in the brewery, and you're right, and I think we should be, we should acknowledge that and accept it.
Yeah,
I would feel. Professionally and personally, I would prefer cans for lots of reasons. But your points are completely true and valid, I would say.
Yeah, I think there's this sense that people accept some of these faults now as just being part and parcel.
Well, we wouldn't now in Rascals. We would not
Obviously,
accept that now. We would not accept that at all.
Present company accepted, but it's just in the consumer's mind.
Yeah,
because some of these issues are so prevalent.
But it's the same. There's things that have become, that would be identified as classic beer faults, that have become markers for particular types of beer, or for like light struck as something that people just expect.
I was just thinking of that actually, yeah, which I quite like in beer at a certain time.
It reminds you of the summertime and being on holidays.
Yeah. But it's not that I'd want to sit in my kitchen and have a
I've had conversations with people about where it's almost like everything single classic beer fault that you're told to learn to assess as a beer judge, it almost turns up somewhere as being a positive, depending on the association that someone has with that beer, or with having encountered that fault. And that is interesting about consumers becoming maybe more used to some of those things, and maybe we need to question that and question the production aspect of it, so that then if things are being put in cans, that it is best for that beer, or bottles either, know.
Or do you look at it another way and say, well, now that's something is no longer a fault, it's because it's accepted. I don't know. It's not something I would agree with, but does it become so prevalent that nowadays it's
well, I think I get your point, but I suppose we have to think of our customers and our consumers, and if I bought a beer which has happened and you bring it home and you open it and it's not what you're, then you are disappointed.
It's really bad.
You are disappointed.
It's disappointing for everybody.
Yeah. We don't want disappointment.
No.
And I think particularly when we're trying to grow this sector as well, knowing that there is this conversation, this constant questioning about things is really important to have, whether it's about the style of branding that you have, who you're talking to with that branding, how you're packaging it. Yeah. It's really important to have those conversations and to hear those conversations on something like this podcast.
Well, I would just like to make a point on that, and it's another word that I use a lot in work, and that's accessibility. And I think that to grow the sector and to grow craft beer consumption, we absolutely have to be accessible to people who aren't familiar with craft beer or don't normally drink it. There was some research done, and there were, I think, 3 reasons why people don't drink craft beer. One was expense. Mm-hmm. 2 was a perception that it's really strong, it gives you hangovers. But the third one is that they don't speak craft beer. Yeah. And to me, that suggests a serious problem that our sector has, and that is that people think it's pretentious, or it's a language they don't understand, or it's not for them, or I don't really get it. And I would really feel that we have to address that and make any person from Lifford to Tralee, from Galway to Dublin, to go, I'll try that beer. It's a pale ale. Okay, I see what that is, and without watering it down or anything like that, or losing your edge or losing your creative flair. I think that's a challenge that we should really try and overcome.
Well, I'd agree with you. I think that there is a risk that, like, I've been in the brewing industry for 30 years, and sometimes I just find you start listening to the way that beer is being talked about. At the end of the day, it's just beer.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is. It's you have to. I'd be spend way too long writing a social media post because I'm going, I think this sounds really crappy, or this sounds completely pretentious, or maybe it doesn't, or who am I? I have to ask, who am I expecting to read this? The diehard who is an aficionado, or someone who's just about to dip their toe in the water? Mm-hmm. And that's a hard...
That's the thing. That's what...
Yeah, you have
back
to
what I was saying about trying to get across all demographics within the Irish craft beer drinkers, and who's even going to be adventurous enough. So it's a blend of, am I going to reach the beer geek here, as well as am I going to make somebody who's just about to try it Would they be interested?
Comfortable with it.
Yeah, they'd be comfortable.
What I also love is looking at where you would drink that beer, who you would drink it with, and what you would drink it with. And I think that that's really helpful and gets over some of the verbose language about it. It's like this is a beer for when you come home from work. This is a fabulous beer to sit down and have over dinner. This is something that goes with, whatever. I think
That's
that's
a good
really
point.
exciting.
I must write that down and use that in my next social media posts. The only time I've used that has been during the summer. This is a summer sessionable beer.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. It's a good way of looking at it. It sells it further, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
It adds value to the pitch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, the most important thing about beer is just that it tastes like more.
Yeah.
That I want to taste this again. I've had a sip of this. The drinkability factor, like for a lot of the beer judging that I have to do, it's judging and it's not enjoying. And that's a very necessary part of the work that I do. But what I really love is I love drinking beer, and I love drinking beer with friends. And I think that's the most wonderful thing. And I think particularly within the Irish craft beer industry, we're so lucky to have so many wonderful breweries, phenomenal people behind it. And with that, I think we'll bring this conversation to close and say thank you so much for joining me and having this fascinating conversation where you dug behind the labels to find out more about your beers.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
It was
Thank
a pleasure.
you.